So my name's Amy, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what makes a good slug pellet and a sort of brief introduction to slug behaviour as well. So next slide, please, Andy. So just a little bit about my background. I currently work as a trials officer at I2L Research, based up in Newcastle. So we do efficacy testing of agrochemicals. I've only gone into, so it's all very new. My background's predominantly slugs and slug pellets. So 4 years before that, I'd been doing my PhD looking at improved management of slugs, predominantly from a metaldehyde background, looking at sort of why metaldehyde pellets, there's all this concern that they're not very effective. So I was looking at changing the concentration of metaldehyde in terms of the foraging and feeding behaviour of the slugs. You know, what were they happy to accept as a pellet? Would they re-accept a pellet once they'd fed on one? The health status of the slug after feeding, so how long would a slug have to feed for before it was classed as sort of paralyzed on the soil surface, and whether it would recover from that in relation to how long it had fed on the pellet. I looked a little bit at ferric phosphate as well. Because the mode of action of ferric phosphate is so different from metaldehyde, it's quite difficult to look at the two and compare them as have them as comparison pellets. But I did also look at that in terms of the foraging and feeding behaviour. And I also looked at some new technology that could be out in a few years, sort of controlled release technology for mollusicide. So can you target a part of the slug where you want the mollusicide to be released once they've fed on the bait, which could to improved control of slugs. Can Andy hear me? Thank you. So just a little bit about slug behaviour. So the greyfield slug's probably, as everyone knows, the sort of most economically important slug pest in the UK. And they tend to forage at random, and they'll bump into their food on the field, whether that's through the soil surface or on the soil surface. It's difficult to predict exactly where the population will be in the field. It's best to trap in several areas in your field if you think you've got a slug problem, and then you can employ your pellet regime from there. And upon encounter with a pellet or foodstuff, slugs will tend to take a test bite to determine determine palatability, and it's from there that they'll decide whether they're going to continue feeding or not. There's evidence that larger slug species like the limax, so the leopard slug, for example, have a really well developed sense of smell. So it's been proven well that they can smell their food, but there's little evidence of this in Duroceras. They can certainly smell volatiles from plants, but I don't think it's important for pellets. So I think it's best to assume that the slugs are just foraging at random and they're going to bump into these pellets at random. Yeah, and the next slide, please. So this is just a little example of a video that I took during my PhD and the sort of work I would do. So in that arena, there are 6 slugs. Andy, I think if you click on the video, it should play. There are 6 slugs moving around in there, around some pellets, and I would take those videos and watch them. Thankfully, they're sped up quite considerably, and look at sort of time taken to find the pellet, how long they're feeding on the pellets for. And you can get lots of data from that and also track individual slugs. It's quite a time-consuming process, but I found it was one of the best processes just for looking exactly at what slug was doing what. So yeah, next slide, please. So what makes a good slug pellet? So from a grower's perspective, they need to be easy to apply, and you should have sort of a relatively even spread of baiting points. There's this sort of balance to be had, I think, between the size of the pellet and the concentration of the active ingredient and the integrity. So if you have a really, really tiny pellet, you're probably going to lose the active ingredient quite quickly through rainfall or moisture. But that being said, the smaller the pellet, the more baiting points you're probably going to have. So there is that balance to be had between the baiting points, between pellet size and integrity. And it's definitely something that I think is the focus of a lot of work at the moment. Good pellets should maintain their shape, they should hold the active ingredient, not mould after exposure to moisture or rainfall. And finally, of course, you should be seeing a significant reduction to damaging crop from applying pellets. Next slide, please. And then from a slug's perspective, they need to be able to feed on it, so palatability is essential. There's this sort of, I think, debate about whether a slug is attracted versus arrested to a pellet. So in my opinion, when a slug takes a test bite of a pellet, if it's going to feed on that pellet, it almost needs to be arrested by what the pellet formulation, so the slug continues to feed on the pellet. I don't particularly think that they're attracted from any distance. So palatability and formulation is just absolutely key. And again, the pellets must require good integrity and have a decent amount of baiting points, so the slug's got a good chance of bumping into one in the field. Next slide, please. So as I'm sure everyone aware, the future is definitely ferric phosphate for now. So revoking metaldehyde from the market it's definitely, I think, came as a shock to quite a lot of people, but it is a really good thing, I think, for growers, in that it means that there's this race on to get the best ferric phosphate formulation pellets. So people are pushing to improve their formulations, and there's going to be lots more formulations on the market soon enough. Obviously, you're not going to get that risk of water pollution with ferric phosphate either, which is fantastic. And it's just important to remember that the mode of ferric phosphate, of action of ferric phosphate, is completely different to metaldehyde. So you're not necessarily going to see lots of slug cadavers on the soil surface as you would after applying metaldehyde, but you are going to see a significant reduction of crop damage. The slugs, after feeding on ferric phosphate, tend to go under the soil to die. So the evidence in that is just going to be the reduction of crop damage. And I think that's all I had to say.
That's great, thanks Amy. So as I say, if anyone's got any questions for Amy, feel free to pop them into the chat, and we'll have a session at the end where we can go through those. So up next we have Andy Bailey, who's our technical specialist for molluscicides. Andy, I'll hand over to you then to go through gusto iron.
Okay, thanks Mel. Morning everybody. So yeah, I'm just going to take you through a few slides on our ferric phosphate product, Gusto Iron. It's roughly a 3% ferric phosphate. We've got a kind of a line with this, everything you like about Gusto in a ferric. So that's kind of relating to our Gusto 3 metaldehyde product, which I know was widely used and accepted in the market. So what we wanted to do was take some of the aspects there that were obviously liked by the market, and translate that to a ferric offer. So here we're saying Gusto Iron, it's excellent value slug pellet, and it's offering durable, consistent control of key UK species. It's manufactured using Desidero technology. It's a wet process, and that gives us a good pellet. You've just heard Amy talk about the importance of pellet integrity and durability in the field, and we believe our product is durable, and it's got very good mold resistance. One thing about was the same for Gusto 3 and is true for Gusto Iron, is that ADAMA pellets have very good color retention. You know, they are very blue, and I think the color is important because it's important to see where you've spread, but equally it's important to be able to go back and check that your pellets are still there. So it holds its color well, it doesn't bleed color. And our baiting points, I'll talk a bit more about baiting points, but we believe we can hit optimum baiting points with this product. It spreads well, and it's a wide label. We've got a wide range of agricultural and horticultural crops on there. Unfortunately, we're missing strawberries, but that's the only one we're missing. So just to talk here about, again, this everything you like about Gusto in a ferric. So this is just a very simple comparison of the two, because clearly the difference between Gusto iron and Gusto 3 is the active ingredient. So Gusto iron is ferric phosphate based, Gusto 3 was metaldehyde. But apart from that, all the other characteristics, the efficacy, the same production process, the durability, rainproof, mold resistance, uniform size and density, these things are all the same in terms of the same standards. The baiting points, well, the pellet size is slightly different, so that's where we have a difference as well. Gusto iron is a slightly larger pellet, and therefore to achieve the optimum baiting points, which I think widely accepted is between 40 to 50 baiting points a meter squared, we can get good efficacy with Gusto iron at 5 kilos per hectare. The maximum rate is 7. In higher infestations, of course, you can increase the rate. With Gusto 3, 45 baiting points was at 3.5 kilos. That was simply because it was a 2 mil pellet, so it was a smaller pellet. So we're manufacturing Gusto iron with Desidero technology again. This is our process, which is a two-stage drying process, and it enables us to dry the pellets from the inside out, so we don't end up with pellets with a hard outer surface and a soft inner, which wind it back a few years. We used to have pellets on the market that were like that, and their durability was quite short. So we have a good consistent pellet throughout. Talking about size, the size of the pellet within the production, we've got some photos here. You've got Gusto iron there, and there's a couple of competitors, a couple of other wet process leading ferric competitors there. They're all good pellets now. Manufacturing has improved. These wet process pellets are made to very high standards. What I just wanted to say about Gusto iron is I've got here an average of diameter and length over 19 production batches. So we're looking here at diameter and length in millimeters, and it's just to show you that we're quite tight and consistent. The diameter of the circles, the purple circle with the white interior, and the length of the solid purple dots on there. And even though there is some variation, we're talking about the gradations on this circle chart of 0.5 millimeter. So there's always going to be fluctuations, because I'm sure, as you're aware, these are wet extruded pellets. So the pellet substance is forced through a die, and then a knife is rotating at very high speed, and that speed of knife dictates the length of the pellet. But we feel we've got a very consistent production process, and it gives us some consistent high quality pellets. And consistency is important for a number of reasons. Lots of variation in length. I mean, you can see with their competitor too, if you look at that one, there's quite a bit of length variation within there. They're very well formed pellets, but there's some variation in there. I think if you've got a variation of pellets within batches, then much smaller pellets behave differently to the larger ones when they're spread. And also the durability may be slightly different due to the different sizes of pellets. So a consistent sample is important. The importance of baiting points. We've heard from Amy that slugs, they're kind of foraging away, and they'll come across pellets. So having a good number of baiting points for them to find is important. It's absolutely key. Now, there are different strategies here. Some people offer larger pellets, and some offer smaller pellets. I mean, with larger pellets, the claim there, of course, is that the larger or the smaller, sorry, surface area to volume ratio, because the actual pellets are larger, the more mass, means that they could be durable for longer. But with larger pellets per kilo, then you know, you're essentially going to be spreading less baiting points. So could be a risk there that you don't have the number of baiting points. But of course, the argument would be that the larger pellets are there for longer, and so the slugs can return. Well, the key there, of course, is that your pellets last and they don't mold, and they remain palatable, I guess, over time. Also, larger pellets, they've more mass. They may spread more evenly at distance. Smaller pellets, you know, as I said before, our Gusto 3 metaldehyde was a 2 millimeter diameter pellet. So there were more pellets per kilo. Smaller pellets can enable more baiting points per meter squared, but again, because then you've got a higher surface area to volume ratio, they're more prone to durability issues, their integrity. They could break down with poor weather and moisture. So they could break down quicker. So perhaps you might have to reapply more often. And also they're smaller pellets, so ballistic wise, there may be a little bit more inaccuracies when you're trying to spread them to distance. And they're also more susceptible, smaller pellets, when spreading conditions aren't optimal. You know, it's a bit windy, then I always think spreading slug pellets is never an exact science. You know, the equipment we've got has improved, but there's still variability inherently in spreading pellets. Gusto iron, we've kind of gone with our strategy down the middle in terms of size. We give it our numbers of pellets per kilo are above 85,000, so that 85,000 to 90,000, with a bit of variability sometimes there in terms of a tolerance of production. But it's enabling us to hit baiting points of 45 pellets per meter squared, and we believe we've got the optimum ratio between surface area of pellet and number of baiting points in terms of balancing the risks of going one way or the other. We've got a durable pellet that delivers sufficient baiting points for good efficacy. You know, our pellet, it's good resistance to molding, so it stays there, and the key is as well, it's palatable to slugs. Just some efficacy data here for you. This is a comparison of Gusto iron with, there's a leading metaldehyde in here and a leading ferric phosphate competitor. This is wheat emergence. So we're looking for higher bars, taller bars are better because they're improved emergence. You can see the untreated, the emergence is quite low. This is 21 to 28 days after application. So a long time looking at persistence. I think this is just showing that we're comparable with other standards. This is some data on oilseed rape in the field. Now this one is percentage damaged plants. So here smaller bars are better, so you can see the untreated there, and this is at 3, 7 and 14 days after application, and you can see that, you know, that pellets are reducing the amount of damage on the rape there, and I think, you know, you can see again that Gusto iron is performing well compared to the standards. In terms of durability and persistence of pellets, the graph in the top left is from field trials, and this is showing on a 0 to 10 scale. So it's 0 is 0% degradation of the pellet, and 10 is 100% degradation. The pellet's kind of disappeared. So you've got Gusto iron compared to, again, a leading ferric phosphate and a leading metaldehyde. So over time, 7, 14 and 21 days. And we also had natural rainfall cumulatively over that period of time of 40 mils. And you can see there that Gusto Iron is comparable again, or slightly better in this case than the competitors. There's a controlled conditions trial in the bottom right-hand corner. So that's actually in arenas with 4 millimeters per day simulated rainfall over a period of 14 days. And this is kind of looking at 0% degradation up to 50% degradation over that 14-day period. And again, we've got a leading metaldehyde, a leading ferric phosphate and Gusto Iron compared in there. And they're all pretty comparable. In terms of mold resistance, this is a very simple test based on taking pellets, putting them on some cotton wool in a petri dish. It's a very simple test, adding some moisture, and then looking at what happens over time. At the top, we've got Gusto Iron. At the bottom, we've got a leading ferric phosphate competitor. And you'll see at the bottom, well, first of all, to say that Gusto Iron looks pretty similar throughout, whereas the competitor over time, first of all, bleeds colour. I would say that is one thing, you know, it's very clear with Gusto Iron, but the pellets stay blue and visible. The competitors bleeding some colour, and then you'll see some mould appearing over time, whereas Gusto Iron is standing up very well to mould development. So I think that's the end for me. That's just a reminder again of a summary of what I was saying about the product. And I think, as Mel said, we can take some questions at the end. I did just want to mention this before I stop speaking, and we'll take questions. But just to mention that if you go on the ADAMA website, you can subscribe to our seasonal hub. There's a lot of mollusicide information within this hub, and some more information about Gusto Iron, etc. And you can also subscribe and get a copy of our autumn cropping guide, etc. So, you know, there's some seasonal agronomy, regional insights, etc. in there. So just to mention that. And then thank you, and I'll say back to Mel, I think, for you to handle the questions, Mel.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andy. Thank you. So thanks to everyone that sent in questions so far. There's a couple you can see there, and I've had a couple sent directly to me. So I'll start then for a question for Amy, if I may, Amy. The question was, do you have a view on the likely slug pressure this season, given the rain that we had earlier in the year?
I think that it could be quite bad later on in the season. I think definitely at the moment, especially up in Newcastle, it's very dry. But I do think that later on in the year, it's probably going to be quite high pressure.
Thank you. And Andy, I don't know if there's anything, did you want to add to that?
I think so. I think I agree with Amy. I would say, you know, the rainfall that we had in May and June, you know, we must have set some populations there. I mean, yes, it's very hot and dry at the moment, but slugs will be going down under, I guess. But I think there's high risk, and I mean, there's going to be early trapping needed this year to see where we are, isn't there, for pressure?
Thank you. Next one then, Andy, this one's for you. Can you tell us more about the Desidro manufacturing system? Explain the detail of how the anhydrous content of 29.4, I think that should be 2.94, in Gusto Iron transfers to your advantage in the field, controlling slug damage in the potato crop.
In terms of, sorry, can you just repeat it, the first part?
The first part was talk about the Desidero manufacturing system.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, Desidero is a descriptive term for our system. It was designed to try to avoid what used to happen, where some pellets were made and dried quite quickly. If you dry a pellet, and even a wet process or a dry process, if you dry a pellet very quickly, I mean, this is particularly relevant to wet process pellets, you can end up with kind of drying them from the outside in, and you don't get optimum moisture release. So when you place them in the field, they've kind of got a hard exterior. We used to say it was almost like a Revel chocolate, where you've got a hard crust but a soft center. So you know, they remain palatable, but the problem is when they get moisture on them or rainfall, then they can go pretty quickly in terms of pellet integrity. It can decline pretty quickly. So the process was developed to form a two-stage and a long drying process, which really looks at trying to dry from the inside out. And so you don't get that crust on the outside, but you get a good throughout dried pellet that still remains palatable, though. It's not, you're not producing a pellet that's as hard as nails, and slugs don't find palatable. You know, it's so yeah, that's our process. Now, how that relates to controlling, or what's the benefit for slug control in potatoes, I guess the key for me is the durability again. You know, it's a pellet that'll remain, you know, through irrigation and you know, applying rainfall, etc. And it'll give a long durable control and good efficacy.
Great, thank you. And another one for you, Andy, on gusto iron. So can you confirm the spread distance for the stock span jet is 18 meters? Is this a practical constraint when other products with larger pellets will spread to 24 but only have 42 baiting points per meter squared? Where is the balance in the field? Do we have data available on ballistic properties of slug pellets?
I think yeah, and this is a real interesting area, because if I'm asked, you know, how confident are you that you get a perfectly even spread from a slug pellet, I'd probably say absolutely nailed on. With our work with SCS, I mean, we do work with SCS, as I know most manufacturers will do. You know, you can certainly be confident about spreading to 12 meters. We supply and back calibration data to 18. I wouldn't say that you can't spread to 24, but you have to accept that you might get a bit of variability. And I think we all know that there are a number of things have to be in your favor. It's almost like applying anything, isn't it? Spray applications, optimum conditions. If it's windy, that'll have an effect as well. We've looked at it with SCS, and we spread very well to with our pellet to 18. You can spread to 24, but you know, I honestly think it's the same with other pellets. Are they really true to 24? You know, I think all I'm going to say is I'm confident to 18. Absolutely.
Thanks, Andy. Another one for Amy. on slug species, did you see any difference in terms of slug behaviour between different species if you tested different species?
I actually only looked at the grey field slug because that's probably the most economically important slug pest. That was the only one that I studied the behaviour of. I think with larger slugs, you tend to see more defined behaviour such as trail following. So a lot of slugs, like the bigger Limax species, will follow each other's slime trails in the field. So things like that could be for predator avoidance, or if they've like following for food. But you don't see that as much in the grey field slug. But I'm not too clued up on other slug species apart from the grey field slug, unfortunately.
All right, thank you. Andy, can gusto iron be mixed with seed at drilling? If not, why not?
It's not on label, I think, and I know that's a simple, you know, I'm not being flippant there, but we don't have that on label, so it's not supported. You know, you know, there are lots of views about admixing with seed, etc. On I know there are opinions from various areas about it. I think very simplistically, if you want to even explore getting an admix on a label for drilling, admix with the seed, then you know you have to produce a whole data package for that. And I think it's as simple to say we didn't do that.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that's an interesting question, because of course it's my understanding at the moment that practice is not widely adopted in the UK, but you know, if there's a feeling that that is something that would be interesting going forward, please feed that in, because of course we have future slug pellets in development, and it's something that we could perhaps look at going forward. So that's let us know. Okay, I think this is probably the last question we may have time for, unless there's any other ones that want to be sent in the last few minutes. And this, maybe this is for Andy and Amy, perhaps. So concentration of metaldehyde has been shown to affect paralyzed dead slugs. Is the same true of ferric phosphate concentration in a pellet?
I think so. I looked at the sort of concentration of metaldehyde in relation to whether you're going to get paralyzed or dead slugs. And what I found with metaldehyde is that the higher the concentration of metaldehyde, so if you went up to like a 5% pellet, for example, the slugs just aren't going to feed on it because they can detect the metaldehyde. Similarly, if you drop it down to a 1% pellet, you're going to get feeding, but you're not going to see the mortality that you'd want to see. So that middle ground of 3% is probably where you're going to get a fair play between getting what I would call sort of severely paralyzed slugs that are likely to succumb to either predation or to die on the soil surface when the sun comes up and they dry out a bit more, or your dead slugs. And I think I didn't actually look at anything other than the sort of 2.95% ferric phosphate pellet in relation to that, but I think you're going to get that playoff again between you need to get enough active in there to have that molluscicidal effect without either putting the slug off, but then you also need to think about cost as well. Is it going to be more expensive to have that 5% ferric phosphate pellet, which is likely to, the 3% pellet's probably going to do the same job as well. So I think Andy might know more about the sort of ferric phosphate concentration side of that.
I don't really. I think we very simply took the you know, the view of going for a 3% just simply because that was where the market had gone, and we did it through efficacy. You know, we saw the efficacy that was required through that. You know, we haven't looked at this, not with this product. I'm not saying that we won't do more targeted things with new products coming, but with this product, Gusto Iron, we very much were led by, you know, by our efficacy package, etc. So we're getting optimum efficacy from what we had on the delivery and the baiting points.
Okay, any last questions before we wrap it up? I'll just check down the list that I've covered everything that I've been asked. Yeah, I think that's everything. Okay, that's brilliant. Well, thank you very much to the two speakers. Amy, thank you very much, and Andy. Hopefully there's been some useful bits of information there for everybody on the call. We have recorded the session, as I mentioned at the start, and so the session will be available again for anybody that wants to revisit anything, or that's available to send around to any other colleagues that couldn't be here today. But thank you very much again for joining, and then we'll sign off for this morning.